All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Katie Monahan, and I'm a communications strategist here at the Ohio Arts Council, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Ohio's Historic Architectural Styles. Before I introduce today's speakers, there are just a few housekeeping items to go over. First, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode. This just helps to cut down on any feedback issues during the presentation. But that doesn't mean that you have to stay silent. If you have a question at any point, feel free to type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen in the control panel there. We'll monitor those, and we'll be sure to leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A. Next, if you experience audio issues or have trouble connecting, we recommend refreshing your browser. And if that doesn't work, try logging off and logging back on. And finally, today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll post the recording on the OAC's webinar page and on our YouTube channel by the end of business on Monday, June 1st. So if you aren't able to catch the entire live session today, or you'd like to go back and listen again or share it with a friend, you'll be able to find it in either of those locations. All right, that does it for housekeeping. So next, I'd like to welcome our friend, Joyce Barrett, the Executive Director of Heritage Ohio. As Ohio's official historic preservation and Main Street organization, Heritage Ohio fosters economic development and sustainability through preservation of historic buildings, revitalization of downtowns and neighborhood commercial districts, and promotion of cultural tourism. Joyce has been the Executive Director of Heritage Ohio since 2007, and she was integral in the development of today's webinar. She actually connected us with our wonderful presenter, who you'll meet in just a minute. So I think it's only fair that I hand off the formal introduction duties to Joyce. Joyce, thanks so much for helping us pull this together. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. Happy to partner with the Ohio Arts Council and share the great expertise we have from the State Historic Preservation Office. I'm happy to introduce Barb Powers. She's the Department Head of Inventory and Registration at the State Historic Preservation Office at the Ohio History Connection. Barb Powers has more than 30 years of experience with Historic Survey and National Register Historic Places programs in Ohio. She serves on the commission for the Thomas J. Moyer Ohio Judicial Center and is the state coordinator for the Society of Architectural Historians online publication, Archipedia Classic Buildings. Barb served as project manager for Ohio Modern, Preserving Our Recent Past project that produced a statewide historic context for 1940 to 1970 and Dayton area mid-century property. She holds a bachelor's degree in American Studies from Miami University and a master's in architectural history from the University of Virginia. Take it away, Barb, and I'll be helping with the questions and answers at the end.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joyce and Katie, and hello, everybody. Glad to have you joining us this afternoon. Today, through this quick trip, we will explore a sampling of the richness and diversity of Ohio's architecture, and through it, tell the story of Ohio from early settlement through industrial expansion to modern times. We'll touch upon several broad themes in American architecture and introduce styles and building types illustrating those themes and linking to aspects of our state history. It has been said that architecture is influenced by culture, and the longest lasting expression of culture is architecture. This idea is no more evident than in the mounds and earthworks of the prehistoric cultures of the Fort Ancient, Adena, and Hopewell. Long before Europeans arrived, the earliest inhabitants of present-day Ohio left their mark on the landscape. The monumental earthen architecture provides valuable insight into the ceremonies and belief systems of these ancient American Indian cultures. The Ohio Hopewell Mounds and earthworks are distinctive in their scale and complexity. The Great Pyramid in Egypt would fit inside the Wright Square at Newark Earthworks, or the square earthworks at Sipe, which is part of Hopewell culture. And those are just portions of these much larger sites. These sites were first documented in the Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, an 1848 publication that was an archaeological survey of the Hopewell culture and the first publication of the Smithsonian Institute. These sites are under consideration now as World Heritage Sites. Ohio's 19th century architecture reflects a variety of cultural settlement patterns and religious beliefs, and through the Public Land Survey, a checkerboard pattern of roads, lots, and farms that still define the Ohio countryside. Ohio settlers brought their building traditions with them. Early Ohio architecture is defined by this regionalism. In South Central Ohio, early buildings like Adena reflect an upland South and Virginia influence, expressed in classical details and detached or semi-detached dependencies. Adena was the home of Thomas Worthington, who came to Ohio from Virginia. The house is from plans by Benjamin Henry Latrobe, who was the architect of the US Capitol, and it is one of only 3 residential buildings that Latrobe designed. It's built of local sandstone, and it shows us that 3-part plan. It's U-shaped, 2-story center portion, and then 1-story flanking wings that create balance, symmetry, and proportion. Worthington was a leader for Ohio statehood. He was our first senator, and he was our 6th governor. As a senator is likely how he made the acquaintance with Latrobe. And for 1807, this is a very sophisticated house for this time in Ohio. More typical house types associated with the Virginia and Mid-Atlantic migration is the Henry Mase house you see in the lower corner. Mase migrated to Ohio from Virginia, and this 2-story high, 1-room deep house with a simple gable roof and brick construction has a symmetrical 5-bay facade, center door, and gable end chimneys. And we see these throughout what is known as the Virginia Military District. And that was land granted to Virginia for military payments to veterans following the Revolutionary War. Often those veterans sold that land off to land developers who then came into Ohio. Settlers in Northeast Ohio were largely from New England and upstate New York. New England town plans were transplanted into village greens, often with centrally located public buildings, such as Tallmadge Church. And these also show the influence of local carpenter builders' use of pattern books and builders' guides. The survey, sale, and early settlement of Western Reserve was conducted by the Connecticut Land Company. Roughly, this comprises the northeastern portion of Ohio and the area known as the Firelands, which is Erie and Huron counties. The land was kept by Connecticut to grant back to Connecticut citizens who had suffered losses from British coastal raids during the Revolutionary War. Talmadge Center was platted in 1806, and you still see today that configuration of those 8 roads converging in the town square, which features Tallmadge Church. Tallmadge Church was designed by Lemuel Porter. He was a master builder from Connecticut, and you can see it definitely shows those features right out of Asher Benjamin's American Builder's Companion, which was first published in America in 1806. The German separatists seeking religious freedom established Zoar in eastern Ohio. In 1817, they came to America and to the new state of Ohio, and they stayed in Zoar throughout their existence until 1898. In fact, descendants of the Zoarites still live in the village of Zoar. It shows traditional Germanic architectural features, building traditions, and a medieval agricultural landscape pattern known as a landschaft, where the village is surrounded by farmlands. Zoar really is a German village transplanted into rural Northeast Ohio. Number 1 house, which was originally a dormitory for elders, was the home of the community's leader, Joseph Beimler. The large brick building was constructed in 1835 using elements of Federal Greek Revival style, including its symmetrical form and columns supporting a triangular pediment over the entrance. similar to architecture of the same period in Germany, and the buildings were numbered for distribution of supplies. The garden shows a geometric layout with a central evergreen Norway spruce referred to as the tree of life. It was encircled by 12 paths of righteousness and flower gardens. These were used by the Zorrites for recreation and reflection, and also contributed to the local economy. Their bulbs and flowers were sold and shipped. The housing and building stock also show construction techniques showing their German roots. Many of the buildings have barrel vaulted stone basements and use as construction bricks formed by straw and hay and covered with stucco, which were called Dutch biscuits. The speed at which Ohio was settled was unprecedented, and in 1830, most of the desirable land was purchased. We see here in these, as the communities developed, the work of local architects and builders. These are examples of Federal and Greek Revival style architecture, classically influenced design and details, often in combination of the two styles, not always just pure interpretations. Again, many of these designs and features are coming out of English and American builders' guides and transmitting these styles into the growing Midwestern states. They show characteristics of delicate ornamental motifs, thin, delicate window mullions, end chimneys, fan lights or multi-pane transoms over the doorways, side lights, definite symmetry to their overall massing, multi-lighted paned windows, 9/6, 6/6, temple-like front porticos. The Mont Taft Museum is one of Ohio's finest examples of the Federal style. The Matthews House is designed by Jonathan Goldsmith, again, an architect builder who came to Ohio from New Haven, Connecticut. The doorway has exquisite details of the fan light and side lights, and that central block with those adjacent wings is a typical house type form we see from this period. The Samuel Mccracken House, known as the Georgian, was local builder is Daniel Sifford, and he was from Maryland. It shows delicate window and door details and incredible curving bays on the side of the wall over by the portico. And the Avery Downer House is by Benjamin Moore. He was a Welshman who was English trained. And again, it shows that three-part plan, and its details come from another builder's guide by Menard Lefevre, Modern Builder's Guide. And it has more of a, with its portico, columns, and that very dominant temple-like front, more Greek Revival influence. And Greek Revival, often associated with public and government buildings. It's classical, used classical sources for design. Greek origins were democracy were linked with American democratic ideals. So Greek architectural forms became appropriate symbols for political ideas of which our country was founded upon. One of the earliest examples of this is the Second Bank of the United States that was designed by William Strickland. And this was a very influential example and very much known about. Here in Ohio, between 1830 and 1860, nearly every first-generation courthouse and many churches in Ohio followed Grecian models. And one of the most outstanding is, of course, our own Ohio State House, built between 1839 and completed in right before the Civil War in 1861. It was a very ambitious construction project for a young state, but it also set the tone and example from county courthouses, such as the pristine temple design of the old Montgomery County Courthouse, down to the most modest township of Hall, as using Greek Revival as portraying that government symbol in urban and rural Ohio. The National Road, later US 40, passed through Zanesville, Columbus, and Springfield and brought Pennsylvania German settlers, and with them stone houses, inns, taverns, and pike towns. Zane's Trace, another early road, cut diagonally across the southeastern corner of the state. These early roads opened the state for westward migration and economic growth, promoting local industries and agricultural trade. The canals, the Ohio and Erie on the eastern side of the state and the Miami on the western side, stimulated both agricultural and industrial development by linking Ohio, Lake Erie, and the Ohio River. Between 1820s and the 1850s, many Ohio communities made that transition from pioneer settlement to agricultural and industrial center. This period began with the building of the nearly 1,000-mile canal system and ended with the coming of the railroads. The second half of the 19th century, it would be the railroads that would project Ohio into the top ranks of industrial states. Again, we have to keep thinking about Ohio's lucrative location. It was centered in the expanding system of railroad lines that connected New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore with Chicago, St. Louis, and the expanding West. At this time, Ohio was moving away from its rural agricultural past towards an urban and industrial future. This time period also brought dramatic changes to architecture and building and construction techniques. Rapid industrialization and the growth of railroads led to these dramatic changes that we'll see witnessed in house design and construction. Growing industrialization permitted many complex house components such as doors, windows, roofing, siding, decorative details to be mass produced and shipped throughout the country in an ever expanding railroad network. Ohio was the source of much of this mass production. Growing manufactured materials, pressed brick, cut stone, plate glass, cast iron, jigsaw wood. Property owners no longer had to rely on just what local materials were available to them. Really, literally, the world was at their beck and call. Plus, there were advances in technology, indoor plumbing, central heating, gas and electrical lighting, refrigeration, changed the nature and location of kitchens and baths in residential architecture. The widespread adoption of the balloon frame method of construction, invented in Chicago in the 1830s, along with the invention of wire nails and the circular saw, transformed the character of American housing in the mid-19th century. In comparison to traditional post and beam and masonry methods, balloon framing could quickly be assembled at a lower cost with fewer and less experienced workers. It also allowed the freedom of design in both exterior massing and interior layout. And it was well suited for building homes in the Romantic, Revival, and picturesque styles that were becoming in vogue in this time period. Same time, early picturesque curvilinear suburbs such as Glendale, Ohio, drew from the rural cemetery movement of the same period and reflecting similar principles of design, creating a naturalistic, park-like environment for domestic life. These suburbs developed with a reaction to increased population, pollution, and congestion in the urban centers and allowed those who could to move to the countryside. Village of Glendale was laid out in 1851, and it is believed to be the earliest known subdivision village in the United States. It's contemporary to Llewellyn Park in New Jersey, but its plan predates that community by a couple of years. The village was laid out along Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Dayton Railroad line, and this rural location gave railroad along the railroad gave residents easy access to neighboring cities and workspaces. The street plan is what makes it distinctive. It was laid out in a curvilinear pattern and related to the topography. That was a radical change from the grid plans more common at the time. It also incorporated picturesque vistas and landscaping and Italianate style architecture placed in large lots. The Italianate style shows the influence of the romantic picturesque period of the 19th century and was popularized by influential pattern books by Andrew Jackson Downing, his Cottage Residences, published in 1842, and the more known Architecture of the Country House in 1850. Downing's pattern books presented houses through elevations, floor plans, and details, but also gave advice concerning the aesthetics of building. And it's really these pattern books that started planting that initial seed that became the American ideal. That is the single family home in a landscape setting. Italianate style characterized by rectangular, almost square plans, wide eaves, paired brackets, low-pitched hip roof, tall first floor windows, a cupola on top often so that you could gaze out at that landscape, or more practically provide ventilation for the house. Double hung tall narrow windows, pronounced moldings, segmental arched or round-headed windows often define these homes and their characteristics. Was among the most popular 19th century styles, coinciding with a period of great growth in population in the Midwest and Ohio. Two examples are Round Hill in Mount Vernon and Oakwood in Newark, Ohio. Oakwood is attributed to the New York architect Alexander Jackson Davis and may very well be one of the only actual of his designs here in Ohio. And Italianate found expression in urban forms as well. Commercial, fraternal, defines commercial centers and shows the growth and prosperity of Ohio at this mid to late 19th century, both agricultural and industrial centers. Gothic Revival again shows the influence of this romantic picturesque period of the mid 19th century. Its characteristics are more vertical emphasis, steeply pitched gable roofs, cross gables, pointed arches, narrow arched lancet windows, board and batten siding, decorative barge board, often referred to as gingerbread, and finials at the gable peaks to help, again, emphasize that verticality. The Upham Right house shows direct influence of Andrew Jackson Downing's pattern books, which you see an example of. And Oak Hill Cottage is just an outstanding example of the Greek Revival style. Queen Anne style architecture shows the influence of late 19th century Victorian era exuberance of complex shapes, elaborate details, textures, and colors. Queen Anne was first popularized by houses designed by 19th century English architects, published in American architectural journals, and widely distributed through pattern books and mail order catalogs. The Charles Bigelow House, built during the 1880s oil and gas boom in Northwest Ohio, a period of great local prosperity for prominent Findlay businessman Charles Bigelow. Its distinctive appearance reflects the highly decorative Queen Anne architectural style, and the work of a Findlay architect. I look at this house and I just think they did this because they could. And also this time period, we see a very distinct Midwest building type, the combination jail and sheriff's residence. This is an important late 19th century building type that developed in Midwestern county seats. The front portion of the building was the sheriff's house. It was often in a Queen Anne style of architecture. The rear was the lockup or the jail. these buildings had a prominent location on or near the courthouse, and they show importance of the sheriff as a county government official during this time period. Another Ohio architectural achievement, the 1873 Methodist Episcopal Church of Painesville is an example of the Akron Plan in religious architectural design. The Akron Plan incorporates a large open space typically adjacent to the main worship space. This versatile plan allowed for the space to be closed off for Sunday school classrooms or opened up to expand the seating in the worship area. The Akron Plan is the design of architect Jacob Snyder, working with Methodist minister John Hyle Vincent and Lewis Miller, an Akron industrialist inventor who was instrumental in founding the Chautauqua movement. First use of this plan in the 1866 First United Methodist Church in Akron, of course. That building has been demolished. But by the 1870s and through the 1920s, this plan was adapted nationwide and widely published in church architecture publications. I like these two. I feel these are a tale of two cities. This is reflecting Ohio's 19th century urban and rural growth, but expressed through culture and entertainment. 19th century Cincinnati was known as the Athens of the West, rich in cultural and musical traditions. 1870, the Queen City was the 7th largest city in the United States and a major commercial and cultural center of the Midwest. This combination of capital and culture was reflected in the auditorium and industrial halls of the Cincinnati Music Hall. The auditorium had a capacity of 5,228 seats, and it was the largest music theater in the United States until the auditorium was built in Chicago in 1889. Following Music Hall's inaugural concert, which opened the 3rd annual May Festival in 1878, construction commenced on the 2 flanking exhibition pavilions, one for art and one for industry. These were completed in time to renew Cincinnati's premier industrial exhibition in the fall of 1879. This music hall is still the home of Cincinnati's Symphony Orchestra, Pops Orchestra, Opera Ballet, and the May Festival. The Mcconnelsville Opera House and Town Hall has continuously served as the community entertainment center and meeting hall since the opening night performance of Gilbert and Sullivan's The Mikado in 1892. Opera houses such as Mcconnelsville were central to the social and cultural life of large and small towns during the last half of the 19th and early 20th century. This golden age of the Opera House coincides with the peak period of growth and prosperity of Southeast Ohio's coal region. From the end of the Civil War to the mid-20th century, Ohio was one of the most powerful and diverse economic centers in the United States and a chief player in America's industrial growth. At the turn of the 20th century, there was scarcely a growing industry in the country in which Ohio did not have a major interest. By 1930, Ohio was the 4th most populous state in the country, with urban centers from Cincinnati on the Ohio River to the Lake Erie port of Cleveland, with Toledo, Akron, Youngstown, and Dayton in between. This industrial growth changed the face of Ohio through immigration and urbanization. While many states have only a few major industrial centers, Ohio didn't stop at that. Ohio boasts a long list of smaller communities that added to the state's industrial output: Springfield, Mansfield, Canton, Lima, Portsmouth, to name just a few. Again, that location was so crucial. Ohio was a bridge between those industrial centers of the East and the expanding West. All principal east-west transportation corridors crossed our state. The Cleveland Arcade is an exceptional example of its building type, showing similarities to earlier European examples like the Galleria in Milan. But the arcade is distinct in its scale and grandeur when compared to any other American examples from the time period. The Cleveland Arcade's construction coincided with the rise of Cleveland as Ohio's largest city and national leader in industry. Its placement along Euclid Avenue, the major corridor, commercial corridor just off the city's center's public square, demonstrated the arcade's importance to the local economy and growth. Within the industrial context of Cincinnati, the Gruen Watch Company on Time Hill reflects the 19th and 20th century development of Cincinnati as a center of craftsmanship and art. The half-timbered factory's distinctive architecture reflects the design and influence of the American arts and crafts movement as it relates to the worker and the workplace. With the auto boom of the early 20th century, the demand for rubber tires soared. Midwest auto manufacturers preferred to buy from suppliers closer at hand than New England rubber producers. As a result, Akron firms of Goodyear, Firestone, Goodrich became the three largest tire manufacturers in the nation. 1920, Akron employed 73,000 rubber workers who produced 41% of the nation's rubber products. During this time, Akron's population rose fivefold, making it the 10th most populous city in the United States. And the Quaker Oats factory reminds us that agriculture still equally dominated Ohio's industry and economy. This industrialization shaped Ohio's late 19th and early 20th century built environment with factories, skyscrapers, cultural institutions, planned residential suburbs, and housing for workers as well as the wealthy. There were large, impressive homes and gardens of the industrialists. The Kingwood Black Estate in Mansfield. The architect was Clarence Mack. Pitkin and Mont were the landscape architects. The Blacks were associated with the Ohio Brass Company. Stan Hewitt, meaning in Old English meaning stone quarry, or maybe just holy moly. This was the home of Frank and Gertrude Seiberling, then the largest private residence in Ohio when it was built, 64,500 square feet and 70 acres of designed landscape. It has since been replaced in size by Les Wexner's estate in New Albany. Cultural amenities. The formation of art, this time period saw the formation of art museums in leading cities. The Butler Art Institute in Youngstown, the building was designed by the New York City firm of McKim, and White. Andrew Carnegie funded public libraries throughout the state. The Lakeshore Bank and Cleveland Public Library branch was one example. It combined educational, social, and financial services for the ethnic and minority neighborhoods it serviced. At the time, comprised of mostly Southern and Eastern Europeans. And this time period saw the rise of Ohio's industrial leaders. John Patterson from National Cash Register, Harvey Firestone, Frank Seiberling of Goodyear, national leaders in corporate welfare initiatives and housing programs, examples of early 20th century progressive era reform movements linked to improving working conditions in factories. Residential development. Shaker Heights is an early 20th century planned suburban community. Again, it shows that rare rural character, curving streets and landscaping was developed by real estate brothers Oris and Mantis Van Sweringen. It had strict design standards and required approval of plans by the Van Sweringen Company, resulting in architecturally cohesive community, largely characterized by English, French, and American colonial revival style homes, designed by many of Cleveland's leading architects of the era. The suburban Shaker Heights and the related commercial Shaker Square of Georgian Revival style buildings surrounding a village green were linked to downtown Cleveland by the Rapid, a transit line also owned by the Van Sweringens. You can see its path in the map of the Shaker Heights. Trains ran through the heart of Shaker Square, carrying suburban commuters to downtown Cleveland, where they arrived in a station under the landmark Terminal Tower, pictured in the wood block in the promotional brochure about Shaker Heights. Terminal Tower was another Van Sweringen development located on Cleveland's public square. At the time of its construction in the late 20s into 1930, Terminal Tower was one of the most innovative mixed-use projects in America and was the tallest building outside of New York City. Goodyear Heights was planned for workers' housing, and it was a neighborhood created for the Goodyear tire and rubber employees. Home ownership was encouraged through Goodyear financing. The neighborhood plan and landscape was done by Warren Manning, a landscape architect that also laid out this design, landscape design for Stan Hewitt, Frank and Gertrude Seiberling's estate. There was a preference for single family living among workers, and these wonderful Tudor Revival style homes also were surrounded with a yard with a grape arbor, garden plots, and fruit trees. Marymont, near Cincinnati, was envisioned by Mary Emery. She was the widow of Thomas Emery of the Cincinnati real estate family. Marymont was laid out by John Nolan in a Garden City town plan, coming from examples in England. These were considered model towns for new towns, and Marymont was originally created to provide better housing for workers. Its diagonal streets radiated out from its town center. There were single and double houses and apartment buildings, all showing this Cotswold cottage, English influenced design architecture. It was a Tudor Revival style inn and commercial center. During this late 19th and early 20th century time period, Ohio became a powerful political as well as industrial force. From the end of the Civil War to the Roaring 20s, the nation elected 7 Ohioans to the White House. From 1869 to 1881, Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford B. Hayes, and James Abram Garfield, all military leaders in the Union Army, served consecutive terms. Between 1889 to 1923, Benjamin Harrison, William McKinley, William Howard Taft, and Warren G. Harding were the 23rd, 25th, 27th, and 29th presidents of the United States. Now, these United States presidents are all from Ohio. Many of them died in office. So I chose some of their impressive Beaux-Arts, grand monuments and memorials, these classical, grandiose statements to represent their contributions to history. We have the McKinley Tomb in Canton. It has these monumental steps leading to the tomb, very dramatic setting in a park. The McKinley Memorial has a sculpture of McKinley, landscaped Civic Center in the center of Niles. And the Harding Memorial features Georgian marble, iconic Ionic columns, and is a very dramatic setting in Marion. Skyscrapers. Skyscrapers are the most significant contribution the United States has made to the world's architecture. Again, this growing urban populations, intensive use of urban land became very expensive. It was very expensive to build out. So you had to be able to build what? Build up. So technological changes in business, communications, the lighting of buildings, also the introduction of steel frame construction allowed high-rise buildings to be built and be a more economical solution and profitable to rent. They brought about a design challenge though. What should a tall building look like? Well, again, architects turned to classical expressions for a tall building, and they began to imitate a column with this tripart division of space, a base, a shaft, and a capital topping it off. The Wyandotte building is Columbus's first skyscraper and first steel frame building. It was designed by Daniel Burnham firm of Chicago, and Burnham and his Chicago counterparts designed what was called the Chicago School. It was a desire to express the structural and functional realities of the building in a more clearly. So we see that tripart division of the outside massing of the building, that base, shaft, and capital, steel frame construction clad in Roman brick. We also see these distinctive three-sided bay windows, often referred to as the Chicago window. They allowed more light and air circulation into the office spaces, which formed the middle portion of the building. The 12-story high-rise Columbus Savings and Trust building, now known as the Atlas building, also shows that tripart arrangement for early 20th century skyscrapers was designed by the Columbus architect Frank Packard. Packard chose to return to more classical principles and reuse of actual classical forms. In fact, the top part of it looks like an Italian Renaissance palace resting on the shaft and base of the building. The local newspaper article, when the architect was selected for the Atlas building, proclaimed that they were enthused by the use of the local architect for this downtown project, and that we were no longer seeking foreign architects, referring to the out-of-towner Burnham, to build our buildings. Between World War I and II, architecture needed to address the modern era, the machine age, defined by advances in technology, communication, transportation, and the tremendous growth in government and big business. The Art Deco-Style, a term used today to describe architecture, art, and interior and industrial design of the 1920s and 30s, showed streamlined modern forms and details. Stylistic influences coming from the work displayed at the 1925 exhibition in Paris lent the name Art Deco. Cincinnati Union Terminal is an icon of this machine age and Art Deco masterpiece. The monumental building displays the collaboration of architects, artists, and sculptors, displayed through mosaics, architectural rookwood tiles, murals, and grandiose spaces. Now the Cincinnati Museum Center, it includes museums, library, theater, and most surprisingly, a train station. The Thomas J. Moyer Ohio Judicial Center blends architecture and artistic beauty into a practical modern office building design. It was an outstanding example of the 1930s public architecture. The building represents this stripped down classicism of the early 20th century modern design. Its form reflects traditional approaches to balance and symmetry, yet its design is totally modern. From its steel and reinforced concrete to its Art Deco artwork symbolizing the history, natural resources, industries, and achievements of Ohio and its people. Architects creating these types of buildings, this stripped down classicism, this Art Deco, were sometimes called the half moderns by their more radical counterparts. Mid-20th century Ohio was defined by the post-war production of consumer goods, tremendous expansion in suburban neighborhoods, and the construction of the interstate highway and the Ohio Turnpike. After World War II, Ohio continued to grow and be a national leader in manufacturing and industry. And now for something completely different with architecture, radical modernism. Everything we've seen prior to this always was drawing from historical past, classical, antiquity, or other picturesque medieval or our own American colonial past for inspiration. This architecture completely breaks from that. It's dominated by European design theories. Historicism is replaced by architecture based upon function, modern technology, and abstract design. It's not a single style or design approach, but represents various individual expressions. It was a new architecture that had to be created for the new mid-modern 20th century, known as the International Style. It was ahistoric, abstract, and machine-produced. The Libby Owens Ford headquarters in Toledo, known as the Glass City. This was appropriately a glass curtain wall box, very modern, and a form that began to be often associated with corporate headquarters throughout the country. Many of these buildings were some of the first buildings to be built after the Depression and World War II, when there had been almost a decade's worth of very little construction taking place. St. Stephen's Episcopal Church on the Ohio State University campus was the first modernist church in Columbus and one of the 8 churches featured in a 1955 Life magazine article about modern church design. Modern churches like this are often some of the major expressions of modern architecture seen in many towns. The Terrace Plaza was an innovative modernist mixed-use development. It was Cincinnati's first major downtown construction project following World War II. And this international style building was the first modernist hotel in the United States. It was also the first major building by the Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill architectural firm to receive widespread attention and acclaim. It was designed by John Emery, again, a member of the Emery family. When work began on the project, Gordon Bunshaft, the then SOM's only design partner, was still engaged in military service. As a result, Natalie DeBlois became SOM's lead designer for the Terrace Plaza. The lower block of the building was originally 2 department stores. The hotel lobby, rooms, restaurants were all started on floors 8 through 11. This building was an incredible synthesis of modern art and architecture. The Mansfield Art Center, designed by Cleveland architect Don M. Hasaka, presents a decidedly sculptural form in a wooded setting for the display and teaching of art. It was commissioned by the Mansfield Fine Arts Guild. The land for the Art Center was donated by Clara Louise Black. Her father, Frank Black, was a leading Mansfield industrialist associated with the Ohio Brass Company. The Arts Center opened in 1971 with an exhibition that featured the works lent by Agnes Gunn, the internationally known patron of modern art. Frank Lloyd Wright's contribution to modernism. His work shows the evolution from early 20th century prairie-style houses with their open plans, linear, horizontal emphasis, and natural materials, with Westcott house in Springfield being Ohio's only example, to Falling Water, where Frank Lloyd Wright is then linked to the International Style. It shows this volume, interior space articulated through projecting and cantilevered concrete slabs and natural stone. To the Usonian House, the second phase of Frank Lloyd Wright's career. Architectural expressions without direct historical references, reshaped the principles of his prairie style into standardized prefabricated house plans, featuring open plans centered around a fireplace, often constructed of inexpensive materials, concrete blocks, plywood, contributed to the development of the ranch and other post-war World War II housing types. The Veltzheimer Johnson House is the first Usonian design in Ohio. Wright would go on to design 9 other Usonian houses throughout Ohio. The house has redwood and red brick siding and ribbons of glass walls and French doors. It is set on a reddish-brown scored concrete slab. A distinctive feature of the exterior is the fringe of wood balls, apparently stained croquet balls, that extends around the entire roof perimeter at the edge of the flat roof's projecting eaves. Like most of Wright's Usonians, it has a carport rather than a garage. Between 1947 and 1950, the Lustron Corporation developed and sold 2,500 prefabricated houses made entirely out of porcelain enamel steel. And this helped address the post-war housing shortages that were occurring throughout the country. Carl Strandland, who had been involved with Chicago's vitreous enamel products, opened the plant in Columbus, near the airport, in the old Curtiss Wright aircraft buildings. His prefabricated assembly line type of production revolutionized the housing industry, much as Ford had done with the automobile industry. The Lustron houses cost $7,000. They came with 300 parts and used 12 tons of steel. Lustron refers to luster on steel, or lusterite, which is referring to the porcelain enamel steel panels, the thin coating of glass fired to metal that the houses were constructed of, both on the exterior and interiors. The administration of Governor James Rhodes created more investments in public services and infrastructure than any prior period in Ohio history. Highways, expansion of military facilities, the doubling number of state universities from 6 to 12, newer buildings on college campuses, and creating and building new community colleges. One such example is the urban campus of Sinclair, one of the new two-year technical colleges built during his administration. It shows a cohesive grouping of 7 concrete buildings surrounding a central plaza. It was part of an urban renewal downtown site in downtown Dayton. $290 million capital improvement bond package for historic sites included the construction of the Ohio History Center and museums at historic sites. The Ohio History Center, now celebrating its 50th anniversary, is a major expression of modernism in Ohio. In fact, it was described as the most architecturally significant structure in Ohio since the State House, when its opening was featured in Architectural Record. Along with the Ohio History Center, Fort Hill was an example of the Ohio Historical Society's construction of smaller site-specific mini museums that are seen at many of our historic sites. The 1970s brought dramatic and lasting change to Ohio. Ohio's post-industrial economy is driven by technology-based service industries and smaller specialty companies such as the Longenberger phenomena. Longenberger, the company headquarters, mimicked its most popular medium market basket. Company made handmade baskets. It was a family-owned business beginning in the 1970s, and rapid growth and expansion expanded through the 1990s. Museums and other institutions by prominent international architects places contemporary Ohio architecture in the forefront of design and innovation. From the postmodern contextual expressions of Michael Graves in Youngstown to the work of well-known architects such as I.M. Pei, adding their designs to Ohio skylines. The early experimental work of Peter Eisenman, the Wexler Center, combines a red brick fortress-like structure and a three-dimensional white grid extending through and beyond the building mass. The design reflects these overlapping grids of Columbus's street plan and the Ohio State University campus, and also evokes the ghost building of the Ohio State University former fortress-like armory and gymnasium that was on that site and burned in 1952. In closing, Ohio author Louis Bromfield once wrote, "Where exactly is Ohio? It is the farthest west of the east, the farthest east of the west, the farthest north of the south, and the farthest south of the north. and it is probably the richest area of its size in the world. Still today, as throughout its history, Ohio's diversity and balance between urban and rural, industry and agriculture, northern and southern, eastern and western, make it a state rich in architectural character and vitality. Thank you. Any questions?
I'll be happy to monitor questions for Barb. I know some people have written in the chat, and I'll also pick up those questions. Yes, Richard, the recording of this webinar will be posted on the Ohio Arts Council YouTube channel by Monday. Next question. Barb, what is your favorite architectural style and why?
Oh my golly. I love them all. I have to say, I have done a lot of work with Frank Packard, Columbus architect, and his architecture really spans that late 19th, early 20th century. He did some incredible Beaux-Arts type classical buildings, but he also did a number of really impressive arts and crafts, picturesque buildings. They're seen in Newark and in Grandview, suburb of Columbus. And I have a preference for that late 19th, early 20th century period, but hey, I appreciate them all. And Ohio has quite a bit to boast and to be proud of and to preserve.
Okay, Barb, here's a little more complicated question from Mona. Hi, Barb. Just recently, this year, learned of the prevalence of Black settlers in Ohio from 1800 to 1860, and that there was a vernacular style associated with these settlers' houses. Do you have any resources on these settlers and their homes, or can you suggest a possible place to research?
Sure, and I would like to know more about those distinctive house types, because as I had to, of course, say, in an hour's worth of time, we have many more examples and stories to be shared. And our focus was a lot on architectural design, but of course, architecture also conveys historic associations, and there are many places associated with, again, rich African-American and Black settlement patterns. I'm going to maybe direct you to some of the resources at the Ohio History Center, and also let me get your email so I can communicate with you a little further, because I'd like to talk with you a little bit more about some of these locations, because we may have them, some of them documented through our survey. If not, we'd certainly like to talk to you about achieving more of that.
The next question, do you think we are past postmodernism yet?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, architecture coming away from that time period, that post-war era time period, architecture becomes a lot more of an individual expression of an architect's desire and figuring out how to present the program, figuring out how to present what the building is representing. So you see a lot more distinctive architectural expressions that are defined by an architect's design sensibilities. The idea of context and designing within the context, so you have buildings that relate a little more to their surroundings, are certainly something I think is still important. I think moving forward, there's going to be a growing trend in sustainability and designs that address climate change and some of the challenges that our design professions and our design needs address. And some of that I'd have to throw open to some current architects of today practicing.
Joyce, you're muted.
There we go. From Dustin, thank you for presenting this highly interesting information. We are interested in historic preservation and document unique spaces by creating a digital twin. This is a virtual tour of a Logan County, Ohio castle, and it's realitycaptureexperts.com/virtual tours/Makochi Castle. So maybe some other people would want to look into that. Also have, I was wondering, what is the status of the Longenberger building in Newark? The last I heard on its status was November 2019, when Heritage Ohio had a tour of the building and discussed it becoming a hotel. It's still plans on being a hotel.
I think it's still a work in progress.
Yes. Do we have any other questions?
I do want to mention a lot of the sites I showed are open to the public, and certainly now current times excluded, but still, you know, certainly search out some of the websites, because I'm sure many of these places are now also offering some online experiences until you can come back and visit them in person. So that was a good reminder of that by the Makochi people.
And Elizabeth Murphy wants to thank you for your wonderful presentation and your never-ending enthusiasm.
Thank you.
Any other questions? People, this is a good opportunity to ask the expert. There's one came in. Can you talk about any additions to historically significant buildings that have significance in their own right?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is up in Cleveland, the Cleveland Trust Rotunda, which was an incredible banking facility right on 9th and Euclid Avenue. And then in the post-war era, Cleveland Trust, the banking institution, was really growing and expanding regionally, and they decided to hire Marcel Breuer, a modernist architect, to build an addition to their very Beaux-Arts, very classically derived original rotunda space. And so the Breuer Tower that is a part of the Cleveland Trust building is one of those examples of a building and an addition that really showed two very different time periods, but very much has qualities of its own and can be appreciated in its own right. Banks after World War II and after the Depression, banks are another one of those building types that often are the most significant expressions of modernism in smaller towns and in commercial cores. Banks very much wanted to get away from seeing themselves as this traditional banks building type that was associated with the Depression. So they very much embraced the idea of modernism in new banking branches and buildings.
Okay, we have a request from Crystal. Can you share the African American information with everyone? So I'm sure we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Another question, didn't Brian Ireland help with the original save of the Harrison House in Franklinton?
He may very well have done that. I'm not, there's probably somebody else out there or somebody from the Franklinton Historical Society that is more knowledgeable about his role, but he could have been involved in that. And of course, Byron Ireland was the architect of the Ohio History Center and a number of other buildings in Columbus.
Another question, how important is brutalism in Ohio?
Well, it's an example of that later modern, another one of those modern expressions. And our building, the Ohio History Center, certainly has some of the characteristics of brutalism. Likewise, so does perhaps even better, more so, the Newark City Hall. Again, it's a style of building that is expressing certain functions and trying to convey certain elements of design. And Ohio does have some examples of that.
We have another question. Do you have any plans for future seminars on the many types of Ohio vernacular architecture?
Well, I would be up to.
I think it's a great idea.
So we do have there's a lot of topics. As I said, this was such a whirlwind, you know, we were driving 55 down the National Road over to the Ohio Turnpike. So we were covering so many topics that all could be explored in much more depth, and topics that weren't even able to be included.
I don't see any other questions in, so
Okay,
we'll wrap it up.
Everybody stay healthy and stay safe.
Yeah, and I just want to say again, thank you so much, Barb. That was a fascinating presentation, and that there were so many great questions. I know I learned a lot, not being familiar with this myself, so this was really great. Thank you so much. And thank you to Joyce and Heritage Ohio for bringing this topic, and Barb to us. We were so glad to have both of you here, and thank you for moderating our Q&A. Barb, did you have anything else that you wanted to add before we hop off today?
No, I just thank you. I appreciate being invited to participate and share some of the information about Ohio's wonderful architecture. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. We were super glad to have you. And finally, continuing along the path of history and preservation, I just wanted to remind everyone to mark their calendars for next month's webinar. The OAC's Kathy Signorino and Christina Benedetti will be here at 4 p.m. on Wednesday, June 17th, to talk about all of the programs and resources available to Ohio's folk and traditional artists. So if you are a folk and traditional artist and you happen to be tuning in, or if you know someone, do you know someone, Barb?
No, go ahead, sorry.
Okay, so please, make sure to mark your calendar. You'll find more information about that and how to register on our webinars page on our website. That's oac.ohio.gov/webinars. Barb, toss it over to you.
Sorry,
another question came
right before we sign off. I wanted to direct people to visit the Society of Architectural Historians Archipedia webpage, and just again give the shout out to the 36 some authors that joined me in creating the entries on that webpage that really celebrates Ohio's classic buildings. So I just wanted to mention that, and know that the next webinar sounds wonderful.
All right. Let's see. I think we are good. Thank you all again so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you back next month. Thanks a lot.